welcome to the lounge. Today I have Christian Augustine, and we are talking about his brand new Kickstarter, 3E RPG. This is something brand new. It's an RPG that uses the technology to really enhance it. Got procedurally generated maps, very cool stuff. Christian and I have a great conversation. We talk a little bit about gaming in general. It's a lot of fun. I hope you enjoy it. I'll see you on the other side. How you doing?
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me on.
I'm excited because I have a lot of people that do Kickstarters on, and they talk about like rules and stuff like that, or and I'm sure we'll approach that. But you're kind of designing kind of a new piece of technology, which is awesome. That made me reach out to you. It was like, oh yeah, this is somebody I want to have on my show. And by the way, congratulations, you hit your goal.
Yeah, thank you.
That's fantastic. So just could you kind of like, could we talk just a little bit about your background and everything, and how you kind of practiced to make this?
Yeah. So I'm a software engineer. Been in the industry for about 14 years now, and my wife is a web developer as well. So we both have a shared like technical experience. But I worked at some pretty cool companies. I worked at Apple for a while, and still have some good friends that work there. And a lot of that kind of taught me that how important design is. When you're working on something as an engineer, it's so easy to think technical design. Mm-hmm. But if at the end of it doesn't look good and isn't fun to interact with, then it's almost waste of your time. So it kind of gave me that almost like product perspective on it, which is cool. And I've always loved RPGs, so I kind of was building up experience in both of these fields at the same time, not realizing that they would ever converge on this cool project. So it's pretty exciting.
That's awesome. I mentioned that I also worked at Apple, and it's a unique experience working for Apple, and I learned a lot from that. So it doesn't surprise me that you also learned a lot on that kind of design side. What kind of how did you get started with gaming specifically?
So I've always been fascinated by tabletop role-playing games. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of opportunities to play them. Mm-hmm. I always enjoyed playing board games and things like that, but something about the open-ended storytelling nature of tabletop role-playing games, I just, you'd see the book on your shelf or see the book on a shelf and I'd be so interested in it, but also intimidated by it. It was like this club I wasn't allowed in because I have to read a 400-page book, and so I came into it with an understanding that it was for some people who are, who can just read a 300-page book in a weekend, and I realized later, when I eventually got tired of trying to find the perfect group, I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make my own RPG group. I'll be the GM and I'll figure it out myself. And that was when the barriers started coming down, when you look at games like Numenera from Monty Cook Games is a good example. You see the book on the shelf and you're just like, well, that's a big book and it's probably a bunch of rules in there, huh? And you pick it up and it's not. I mean, you really could read it cover to cover. The rules are pretty streamlined and it's just all of this amazing lore and mm-hmm. artwork. And that's when I started to realize that there's almost like a apprehension you have to get over, especially to start game mastering, but to play role-playing games in general. And once I had already committed that I'm going to be a game master and get this group together, which I'm sure as many of us have experienced, getting a group together is, you have to really do some selling to get a bunch of people to sit around and they're like, what? We just sit here with dice? No, trust me, let's play. And, but after doing that, I realized that it's actually more of a natural gaming experience than, in my opinion, board games and video games. It's almost this like natural point you get into that's almost like this, sitting around a fire telling a story mindset that you tap into that feels more natural than a lot of other type of games. And ever since then, ever since I had my first successful-ish campaign where we survived, from then on it was like, okay, so I started collecting all these different books and started, experimenting with different generic rule sets like Fate Core and things like that, and seeing how they have their different takes on the game. Now I've got quite a hefty RPG collection, and I've tried to play role-playing games in every different way. And then of course there's Kickstarter and all these new ideas that are constantly coming out. So it's a really fun time to be in the tabletop RPG community. As a fan or as a creator, it's a really fun time.
It absolutely is. I mean, just seeing it explode in the last few years with, mainstream appeal for Dungeons and Dragons, and then that seems to be blowing up from there, because these Dungeons and Dragons groups that got hugely popular are now like, can we play something else? I'm like, oh yeah, there's Monster of the Week. Sure, why not?
And with D&D, it's interesting because no knock on the system, but I mean, it's not an easy game to pick up and play. If you didn't know anybody who could help you through it, and you just picked it up off the shelf and tried to play, there's a lot that you need to think about. And so it's almost the role playing game that I would have thought least likely to succeed. It's really heavy, and there's a lot going on, and the lore is extensive. For that to be the one that's had such a following says a lot about people's passion, a passion for it, that they're willing to break down what I think is a pretty big barrier to entry with all of their friends, and it says a lot about passion for role-playing games, because I would have thought the little smaller games would be the most popular, but no, people actually enjoy the heavy side of role-playing, which I think that's cool.
I wonder if we'll ever hit that point where the term role-playing game isn't synonymous with Dungeons and Dragons, where people kind of, the wider array of people have an understanding that there's a lot more to it than that, and then we'll see kind of that entry point maybe widen. But for right now, I mean, only one game has movies coming out, and
yeah, that's it. It's just kind of this unstoppable force that just keeps on driving. But it's good in the sense that it exposes people to tabletop role playing in a accessible way. But then it's also kind of its own worst enemy, like you said, where it is kind of synonymous to the extent where you have D&D and then you have games that aren't D&D. And sometimes players will be experienced in D&D, but won't have a lot of overall experience with different systems. So they'll come into a game and think, well, why is it like this? Why we don't use a D20? And it's almost like a criticism on the game, but really it's just different.
Yeah.
And the variety of role-playing games is actually pretty amazing once you're willing to just kind of go through and play the role-playing game however the designer intended it. I mean, like Fate with the fudge dice and things like that, it's really weird to get used to, but there's something really, something cool about dice that don't have numbers on it. And what a cool idea. And the skill list is so simple, and there's something to be enjoyed in each system. So just to illustrate your point, if you go to the D&D subreddit, it's actually a bigger community than the RPG subreddit, which says everything. It's pretty amazing.
I never noticed that. That's funny.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Well, and I think that's just, like I said, it's par for the course for the thing that kind of, that's what I mean, I remember growing up in the 80s and people were yelling, the satanic panic, and they weren't yelling role-playing games, they were yelling Dungeons and Dragons. So, I think that may have been a big part of it.
And that's something people don't realize, is that you might be someone who's not into fantasy, or someone like myself, who I don't really enjoy playing games that focus on magic and spirits and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
It can be really easy to look at the community and say, well, this is for people who really like Lord of the Rings, or who really like, whatever you're thinking, that role-playing is fantasy even. That's almost synonymous to a lot of new players.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not. You could have, you can have modern, you could have sci-fi, and even sci-fi, it could be space opera, it could be, it's endless. Basically, if there's a TV show or a movie set in a certain setting, just like those settings have endless possibilities, role-playing's the same. And some people won't come into the community because they don't really like fantasy. And I think it's nice to break those barriers down and completely surprise them with, like, well, this game is, it's a modern gumshoe detective game. Oh, I love detective shows. And suddenly you have a new RPG fan.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, that's what a cool thing. My first real foray into gaming, as all the lounge lizards out there know, it was Marvel superheroes. And
oh yeah,
I loved comic books. Superheroes were awesome, and and now at this point I've played just so many superhero games. So, it's the one thing I haven't seen a lot of is modern games taking advantage of the technology that we have.
Right.
And as I said up top, that is really that seems to be your bread and butter, sir.
Yeah, it is interesting. I mean, a lot of these ideas started, like I say on the Kickstarter page, that when lockdown hit, which I know, depending on where you live in the world, lockdown can mean different things, but certainly the coronavirus, has changed the world, and it's changed the way that we've had to interact with people, and we've had to reach out to people on Zoom and things like that maybe we weren't comfortable with before. And we had that same dilemma that many role-playing groups had. We were all come over to our house at this time and, bring queso and, bring soda, and you had this certain vibe going on with it. So I'm in Texas, so queso is just automatic, but.
It was funny. I was 100% reminded you were in Texas when you said queso. And also, I really would love some queso right now.
Yeah, exactly. It's never a bad idea. So you have this setup that's, very, very social. And then suddenly, you might have a friend that lives down the block and you're thinking, should we meet up? Should we try one of these online systems? Or we had that dilemma. And in looking at the different things that were available, not to knock them at all. I mean, you have like Roll20 and Astral Tabletop and different services that let you play your game online. They're really comprehensive. They're really, they can do everything. Mm-hmm. Which is the best and worst thing about them, is that they can do everything. So, especially as a GM, if you're like me, a lot of GMs, they become the GM of the group because they're the one that is willing to experiment with stuff and is willing to read that 400-page book and is so like we're already predisposed to kind of I don't want to say obsessing, but if there's options to make your session potentially better, most GMs are going to be very tempted and think, well, if I learn how to use this one feature, maybe that one player will get more engaged, or maybe this or that. And with these services, these platforms, because they're designed to facilitate every possible type of RPG, which we just touched on just how varied they are, just in mechanics and setting. You have to support all of that. So that means there's a lot going on, and you're constantly as a GM having this feeling of, maybe I haven't really learned how to use it properly because there must be an easier way of doing it. And we had that. So we moved to one of these platforms. And we had a really fun campaign, but there was a lot of work required behind the scenes for me to keep it running and to keep it entertaining. And it started the cogs turning that, there's options out there to play any tabletop role-playing game online, but there's no really true online, it seems like a contradiction in terms, but an online tabletop role-playing game where it's not a pen and paper game that you can play online. It's a game that doesn't have a printable player sheet, character sheet. It doesn't have a GM screen. There isn't a book you can buy. It's designed from the ground up to be online and to work best online. So we started playing with ideas and playing with prototypes of both the game engine we were tweaking and also the actual program I started working on, and it just grew from there. Every time we'd add something, it would just make the sessions so much better. And suddenly we're having sessions, and it's this like polished system, and it's like, well, this is great. I mean, we should maybe other people will like this. We should put this on Kickstarter. And now here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, it's like the online tools that are out there are basically the delivery system, but they're not the thing itself. And
yeah, they're tools. Exactly.
Yeah. Whereas, it sounds like you had basically the idea of like, why not make the delivery system and the thing be the same element,
Yeah, and that's the thing is that design can facilitate that kind of thing, where if you make something, if something is just a play chest full of features because the group might need anything, then you're almost limited. You can't really have an opinionated design where you're making decisions for the user that make their life easier. You have to kind of give them everything, and they're going to have to be the ones that figure out how to use it. But by saying this is going to be specifically for this rule set, and the character sheet is going to look like this, you're able to have the design really teach them how to play and make it easy to play. Because the kind of design principle that I like to live by is that good design should explain itself. So if something's well designed, just interacting with it should get you halfway there to understanding everything about it. And by having our own system that's just for our rule set, we really have that freedom to say, you can level up your character and it can walk you through everything because it knows what game you're playing and it knows the best way to display things. And we can play test and say, when you leveled up, did you get confused at any point? And really fix those things and then make them easy so that you don't have to read a book or a bunch of paragraphs on how to use it. It's going to explain itself.
Yeah, you can maximize that user experience, which is just, that's what technology should be able to do.
Right.
Let's talk about 3E RPG. Just kind of, as a whole. What's kind of how do you describe the actual RPG element to people?
So the three E's of 3E is explore, encounter, engage. We tried to design the game to really focus on, I guess the best way of saying it is non-violent resolutions to problems. Not that there isn't combat and there isn't action, but just that shouldn't necessarily be your only device to solve your problems. Which in some RPGs, since their combat system is so comprehensive, it's really, you can tell what the game is geared around based on where the most of the rules are in the game. In most games, the combat rules is a big chunk of the book. It's probably most of the rules, because combat's complicated and you're trying to do something in a tactical way, but without using miniatures usually, so it's even more complicated. So it makes sense that it ends up being this big chunk of the book. But for us, that ended up meaning that we had sessions that were kind of getting repetitive, where it's just kind of, well, what about if we wanted to have a more social or more exploration kind of a game? And so to really rebalance what we call those three encounters, you have social encounters, exploration encounters, and you have combat encounters. To balance those three and make them feel equal, we really, ironically, had to put a lot of work into the combat system. So we had to make it simple. But I've played games before where action is so abstracted and simplified that it's kind of like, just say you did whatever and good for you, you did it. Mm-hmm. And then you're like, well, I don't really feel like I swung a sword. I don't really feel like I was in danger. And then you have some games that feel really, really satisfying, but 20 minutes, 30 minutes later, and like one round has gone by in combat, and it's almost becomes this slog of minutia that you're trying to get through. And so we're like, how can we make it feel crunchy and satisfying, and feel like that your decisions on the gear you wear and all that matter, without it slowing the game down to a halt? And what we did was we came up with this system where each character has an attack die, which ranges from a D4 to a D20, and that depends on your weapon that you have equipped and what talents and specializations you have. And whenever combat begins, you don't roll for initiative. The first thing that you do is you roll to attack. So everyone takes that die, they roll it all at the same time, they add their modifier, and then they tell the GM, that final number. I rolled a 15 or whatever. The GM has the same thing. Each NPC in combat is represented by a single die, from D4 all the way up to a D100 for a boss. And they'll roll their whole pool of dice all at once. And what happens is the defense of the party is a collective defense. It's all the players in the party add their defense together, and that becomes the defense of the party. Same for the NPCs. They have their big defense number. And so when both groups roll at the same time, it subtracts from each other's defense and makes for potentially 20 people just got their attack round done, and it took, 15 seconds, including the math.
Wow.
And then as soon as that ends, you start the next part, which is called the Moxie Phase. And now you roll for initiative. So you roll for initiative, and the NPCs don't roll for initiative, only the players. So NPCs, the GM has the freedom they're not limited by the rules. They're not limited by the turn structure. So they want the goons to start sneaking up behind you. They can just say that that's happening.
Okay.
But the players get a turn order, and then you go through the players one by one, and you decide whether or not to spend Moxie to do things within the battle. So equipping or unequipping weapons or armor costs Moxie, because you have to almost step away from the battle for a moment and have that Moxie to be able to take that initiative. Performing techniques, which is the science-based powers that bionics have. And then the third thing is really the primary way that characters can swing combat one way or the other. And that's where you basically zoom in on that one moment, and the character says, I want to do something. I want to climb up on this balcony, cut the chandelier down, then the chandelier will fall down on the enemies and subdue them, right? And so they propose that to the GM, and now you're in normal skill check land, right? So the GM says, oh, that's going to be accuracy, or that's going to be this or that. If the player's successful and that chandelier falls and the GM wants to reward them for their creativity, the GM will say, wow, you did so good. The opponent defense has gone down by 80, and everyone cheers, right? Because it's so creative. Then the next round begins, and everyone rolls attack dice. So you get the attack part, the clashing of swords, the strong guy is obviously stronger than the weak guy, all that stuff done really fast. And then it's like, does anyone have any smart ideas where they can creatively, shape things, move things in their favor? And that really brings it so that even if you have combat, you're really encouraging that creativity in characters and in players. And so that's the main combat mechanic. And experience points in the game are based on player creativity in each encounter. So it's really I think it was Monty Cook Games said in one of his books that players are going to do what you encourage them to do. You encourage them by giving them experience points. So experience points are based on, how creative were the players in resolving this encounter. A little bit, a lot, very creative. Well, they get more XP at the end of the session. So it's really that thinking out of the box mentality that we want to drive the story forward.
That's awesome. That sounds like it sounds like such a nice streamlined system to do. I mean, I imagine you can do those like skirmishes that might happen just pretty quick with, just a few rolls, and then I don't know, like how long, getting maybe too into it, but how long does a typical combat encounter take?
So typical combat encounter, you know what? I should probably time it so that I can, next time I ask that question, I'll be like, well, statistically speaking, but it's fast. I mean, it's, if it slows down at all, it's because a player wants to spend Moxie and has a really cool idea. And of course, those are the best parts of a role-playing game. So
sure.
If someone has an idea and everyone else is all excited and wow, what a great idea. And they're all rooting for them and they all cheer when they're successful. So if it slows down, it slowed down because something awesome is happening. We wanted the combat part to feel like almost that like Pirates of the Caribbean, like a choreographed dance in the background. This combat is happening in the background, but in the forefront, you're zooming in on, I'm going to sneak up and do this one thing, which also gives opportunities for less, less action-oriented characters to really shine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're saying that the best part of a combat encounter role-playing game isn't paging through massive tomes looking for that feat that you forgot where it was.
That's not my favorite part. I don't know.
Nor mine, and I've done it many times. Now, so the play. So we know how we play. We know what it looks like to play. How does the technology incorporate with that?
So the way that the technology really facilitates this is you have, as a player, you're able to log into 3RPG and see all your characters. Mm-hmm. And when you go into one of your characters, your character sheet is laid out in such a way where you can really easily see all of your skills and the modifier on your roll that skill would give you. So you just looking at it, I roll and add 3. So you see all your skills, and you see all of your equipment, which you can equip and unequip. If you're a bionic, you see all your techniques, and the way that you perform techniques is you have a certain number of slots you can use up each day, and you check off a slot, and that's all going to be just on that one page. And then you have all of your equipment, and the equipment is editable. So you click on your gold pieces and say, add to it, remove from it, give it to someone else in the party. They'll get a notification saying, so-and-so just gave you 10 gold. Whatever things you need to do on your sheet, you can do it all from there. And it's not like these are all text boxes and you type in whatever. It knows, it has the context of knowing what these items are. Mm-hmm. So if the GM gives you 4 yards of rope ladder, it knows you have 4 yards of rope ladder. And if you use up, if a yard of it burns, it's going to say 3 yards of rope ladder. So it knows what these items are, so that you don't have to sit there and manicure your character sheet and fix it every time you do something. As well as that, on the side, you have these panels you can click that slide out with, I say rules references, but it's the whole rules. And on a normal size desktop monitor, you don't even need to scroll to read from top to bottom on these rules. We've tried to keep it as streamlined, and that can be a pro and a con, because I've had RPGs pitched to me before with saying, well, all the rules are just one page, and I think, well, maybe that won't be crunchy enough or satisfying enough, or but really it's that the interface explains a lot of it, to the point where you're not having to explain a lot of things that usually in a book you would need to explain. So it's one of those things you kind of have to experience for it to really make sense. But all the rules that you need to be able to play as a player are available to you on that screen, and they're really easy to follow. Mm-hmm. So you could just stay there on your character sheet and just enjoy playing, and the GM can play music for you or whatever through the system. On the GM side, they have a GM dashboard, and from there they can, control the music, give items to characters, give quest items, which are, items that have no value. They can't sell them or drop them or give them away. It's just kind of like you have the gauntlet of Argo, and that's in your equipment now. And the GM can also remove that from your equipment once it's exhausted or, whatever happens to it. And then also some quick tables that show you how to make NPCs in 3E RPG really quickly. Like, I'm not exaggerating when I say it takes 5 seconds to make an NPC. And boss battles, all of that stuff. And like I said, on a normal size monitor, you're not scrolling to see any of this. This is a single page, and everything is concise and easy. So that when you're on that screen, you're focusing on making the game fun and exciting, and not thinking, let me put a bookmark on page 226 because there's this one thing I want to not forget. And it's a whole different type of GMing. You just feel like you have everything you need, and you can just enjoy telling the story and reacting to your players.
It seems like the kind of thing where that everything you say appeals to me so much. And when I was reading about it, like I kind of felt that way too. It's one of the reasons I like Real Rules Light is because, my attitude is I like to approach things from a fun story, character-driven standpoint and everything like that. But it's nice to have a little bit of crunch in there and kind of, that always adds a little bit of, randomness.
Yeah, and a little bit of realism too. That you.
Yeah.
What's cool with our RPG group is that we actually take turns GMing each week, which has been a really interesting experience. I've never tried this before, but it's going really well in this campaign. And it's something I might facilitate in 3E RPG mechanically down the road if people wanted to have like a GM rota or whatever, because GMing is so easy now. But what's interesting with our group is that we have 4 very different GMs. And so the one GM is much more story driven and kind of prefers the rules to kind of stay out of the way so that they can tell the story. One GM is more improv and wants to really feel like they have that freedom to react, but when they react, it's based on real rules. And so each person GMs completely differently. And so in having our one group take turns GMing, we're able to kind of play test that is this crunchy enough for the player that really likes having pages and pages and pages of rules? Does it appeal to this person? Yeah, they really like it. It's got all the rules that it has are just what they want. Well, then this other person who doesn't like reading rules, are they overwhelmed? Nope, super easy. I really enjoyed it. And so and we do feedback with all of our campaigns, and feedback has not ever been this positive all around. So it isn't just that I have a super nice group. It's that we're all really enjoying this new type of role playing. It's been really refreshing for us.
That's awesome. That's really cool. That's so like, yeah, anybody listening, I mean, if you kind of want to try out something that might work for everybody in a group that's very different, which I have one of those definitely. I also wanted to ask and get some details on the procedurally generated map system.
Yeah.
That's a term that I feel like I heard that term, or that term like will come up like periodically in adventure gaming, and it's like recently it's kind of like come back because systems are able to do things procedurally generated but still have high graphics quality. So
Right.
and like before that, I mean, the first time I can think of like, the Dwarf Caverns roguelike game where everything was keyboard character icons and everything. And so it's, we've come a long way with procedurally generated, that as a term in general. I see that and I think, I think of like roguelikes, and I think of like hex crawls and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Is that kind of where that's going?
Yeah, so my experience with procedurally generated map systems as a player, and I really wish that there was a more catchy term for that, but there isn't that I could find, is with video games. I'm not a huge video gamer, but when I do play, I like games that feel boundless, that feel like, well, I mean, I like tabletop RPGs, so that kind of goes without saying, but I like feeling like, I'm not going to run into an invisible barrier at some point, and it just breaks the illusion that, that I'm actually doing it. And so, I think procedurally generated, maps, or I guess procedurally generated anything, really hit the mainstream with when No Man's Sky came out, which unfortunately didn't have a good release. I think they fixed some of the issues now, and their reviews on Steam are gradually getting better, but it kind of didn't live up to the hype, at least initially, which is a shame. But the concept was better played out in other games like Elite Dangerous. I don't know if you know that one.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so Elite Dangerous does a really good job of this, where you'll go to a certain sector of space, as if it's already there. You're just like, I'm going to go to this place, looks cool. And when you get there, the game lets you know, by the way, you're the first person who's ever gotten here, and you just discovered this planet. And you're like, neat. And you do your thing, whatever you want it to do, like, mining an asteroid or whatever. But the next person that comes to that sector is going to see, they're going to see that, Christian Augustine discovered this planet, discovered this sector. And you'll see that when you go to different planets, it'll show you which player kind of wished it into existence. And really, it's just by exploring, by going to an unmapped part of space, the game says, oh, we need to map this part of space. And so we'll do this and this and this, and there's going to be a black hole. And that's when I think procedurally generated map system, I think that's my biggest inspiration, is that feeling of like, there is no boundary, because the boundary moves as you get closer to it. And so you're actually creating it by exploring. This place didn't exist, but because you're so adventurous, it now exists. I really enjoy that feeling. And so I wanted, one of the things that I do in 3D RPG, which again, this can sometimes sound like a negative whenever I've heard it in the past, is it's a lore light system where there is lore, and it is like a fantasy setting. There's elves and there's dwarves and orcs, but it's lore light in the sense that the lore, we intentionally don't have a lot or any artwork. We don't want to dictate exactly how it looks, but we'll use descriptions that can be interpreted a lot of different ways, so that the group can kind of visualize it the way that they want to. But that means that you have no maps. If we say this place is based on this planet, and this planet has this nation, and this, we're really making a lot of decisions for your campaign that you might not enjoy. It might actually turn you away from the game, or whatever reasons you might have for not enjoying what we decided to come up with for it. So in making it lore light, you're almost saying there isn't a map, there isn't any locations, which, that makes for difficult GMing sometimes, where you really want there to be stuff, and you want the characters to feel like there's a world, and you might not have the, creative energy or the will to design a whole world from scratch. And so I had this idea where, why can't we bring the Horizon Zero Dawn, No Man's Sky procedurally generated concept into role playing? I have a whole shelf full of books with, roll 3D 10s and do this and that and this, and suddenly you have this creature or this location or this. RPGs have, they pioneered the roll on a table to create something new concept. And video games are just getting to the point where it's like, hey, we can make amazing things just suddenly. Now they exist permanently. Well, why can't we join those two things together and say, you're in this one location and you move on to the next hex on the map, and now that you're moving into it, the system rolls on a bunch of tables and says, well, this is a city that has a great library and has 4 inns, and it has a tavern, and the guy who runs the tavern is a gnome named, Harry, and suddenly it exists. This place is like a solid anchored piece of lore, but it only exists because you walked into that hex. And then the GM would be, be just as excited to explore as the players are, because they're not given the ability to over prepare the session. They might have a loose story in mind, but the different locations are going to appear as you explore. So you have to kind of be reactive in that way that only tabletop role playing can make you feel.
That's so cool too. That's well, and that's one of the things that always appeals to me about gaming is improvisation. I actually do. This is the other thing that the Lounge Lizards have heard me say every episode. I do improv comedy, so I like to check that box a lot. So the idea of like, oh yeah, I don't know where you're going yet. Boom,
Yeah. Yeah, and I really had that with one of the players in my group, who's now one of the GMs in my group, was really into improv, and I didn't feel comfortable with that as a GM. That I'm the kind of person that maybe it's the software engineer in me, but like I'm thinking I can just come up with every possibility and then I'll be ready for it, which isn't always as possible as you might think when you go into that. But for me, there's something to be said about not having endless options, and it might seem like a negative, perhaps, when you first think about it. But sometimes, if you can plan ahead, it'll almost take the life out of the story if you plan too much ahead, and can make for a combative back and forth with the players, where you've spent all of this time and energy on this really cool place, and they don't feel like going to that place right now.
Yeah.
And maybe actually, if you kept things light and fun, they might end up there in the end. But you can sometimes, as a player, you can get it too, where you can just tell that you're not doing what the GM wanted you to do, and it's this kind of awkward, like, I guess I hope we didn't upset them because they had something planned, and it makes for kind of like this awkward scenario where sometimes you can get in this trap in a group as GM or player, where you're almost encouraging like the players feel like they need to figure out what the plot is so they can get on it, so that they can have fun, or that they don't, make the GM feel like they wasted their time. And to me, this is the same concept I used when designing the GMing part, but I feel like creativity is a finite resource, right? Like if you're using your creativity trying to figure out what the GM wants you to do, that's creativity you could have spent doing something fun, or reacting to something enjoyable, or making a decision for your character. And it's just kind of that anxiety you can sometimes get as a player, that I sometimes get as a player, where I'm really trying to like, am I doing the right thing? And when you can take that away and know that the GM actually couldn't plan too far ahead, it almost like relieves everybody from that anxiety that like we all don't really know where we're going, and we're letting the GM kind of shape it as we go, which means we can focus on having fun instead of, like, from the GMing side, spending all that creativity wondering what the players are going to do and planning for every possibility and picking out the perfect music and setting up the character sheets and all this. All this creativity goes into role playing that doesn't have to do with role playing. And I want 3E RPG to be something that focuses as much of that creativity as possible on the best parts of role playing, where everyone's having fun and creating a story together. Let's get to that point as quickly as possible. And I feel like the map system is integral to that, in that there is lore. It's there for you to use. You don't have to come up with everything yourself, but you can't over plan for it. You have to just kind of let it happen. And in my opinion, those can make the best sessions.
Absolutely. I mean, that's, you're going on the journey together instead of being led by reins from one place to another,
right?
Which can be, I feel like that makes it, I don't know, more of a group activity, I guess, instead of a
yeah. And don't get me wrong, as a GM, you can still come into the session and have an idea for a plot. You can say, well, they're going to be at a village and something gets stolen from the party, and as they chase them, they were going to find a cave, and you can still have an idea for a plot, and you can still execute that plot. But you are not going to have the burden of saying, exactly where these things are going to happen, or that there's going to be, maybe their last session ended in a village, or the places I've already explored have villages, and that's where they are now. So there's your village. And that there's caves all over the place. So it's really, you can just have that freedom of where do these plot points come up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then you're no longer having to almost coach the players towards the fun. You're able to put the fun in front of them as they explore.
And I'll tell you right now, as somebody that is an improviser, I hate building maps so much, and they're great to have, but it's just, I bought all those map parts from Drive-Thru, and I built this really intricate map, and the players are like, well, we're not going to go there then, we're going to do something else. And okay, cool, that's fine. And they did, but they didn't get to see that map. And I'll use it later, but there was that moment of wait, why did I do this, and I've had those moments of I'll print up this interesting map and go to the game or something like that. That was the only time I've had it happen during quarantine. That was my learn my lesson.
Yeah.
But they're great to have. They're a great visual to have and everything. So it makes sense to say, oh, you're going here, boom, this is what it looks like, and hey, there's this here and this here, and and I'm sure any good game master is going to look at that and go, oh, I could put this here, and I can do this here, and boo, boo, boo.
Yeah. And the parts of the map that it's a campaign, right? So this map is going to be this living, breathing thing that the players, will become attached to certain places, and will have memories that they shared in certain areas. And they're going to want to go back to that one town because there's that one thing there they want to see again. But those will be things that we all came up with together, that happened in the moment. Not that, I'm similar, where I put a lot of work into trying to prep things, but it's really hard to know where to point your energy to where it's going to end up being fun for the players, because you don't know what they're going to do, and you want to give them that freedom. And what's cool with this system is that there will be a map, there will be cities, there will be this, there will be that, but you made them together as you played. They appeared in the game, and people remember points that they had fun doing. So you don't have to be like, what was the name of that one town? Oh, let me get the book. It's almost like the lore is fact checking you constantly. And there's always that anxiety of if I improv, will I accidentally say there's a coastline here when actually there should be a mountain? And one day I'm going to, look silly, and the players are going to realize I don't know what I'm talking about. But in this game, you're discovering it together. You're going to remember that there's, a coastline there. You explored it together. So the more your campaign grows, the more you're going to have places, these hard anchored places where you can have story plots happen. But you're not just calling out a name of a village no one's heard of before and trying to get them interested in it. They'll be like, oh yeah, I remember that place. Yeah, let's go back there. That, so-and-so's in trouble. Oh, we're on our way. It's much easier than trying to transplant someone else's lore into their brains. They made the lore together, so there's no memorizing.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really cool. I just looked at the clock. We are moving right along here, sir.
You're right.
I did want to touch on I feel like the fantasy races are kind of the fantasy races you see, but I definitely wanted to talk a little bit about the three classes, which you kind of brought up before. Right. Yeah, so you've got the hunter, the rogue, and the bionic.
Right. I took a lot of inspiration. I don't know if there's anything of this is technically IP, and I'm going to get in trouble for it. I hope not. It's a pretty old game, but Phantasy Star, especially the older games. Phantasy Star 4 was one of my favorite games growing up, and took a lot of inspiration from the way that they mixed sci-fi and fantasy, where the fantasy definitely felt like fantasy. It wasn't like, it felt like a real whimsical fantasy. And then suddenly you'd encounter a creature that's definitely partly mechanical, and it would bring up all these questions, and eventually later you'd be on spaceships, and it's almost like the juxtaposition between the sci-fi and the fantasy was part of the plot, which I really enjoyed. So in this game, we took hunters from Hunters in Phantasy Star. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that's basically like your warrior class. But in Phantasy Star, a hunter is more of like your mercenary adventurer type. Rogues are people that are more streetwise, that have kind of seen the dark sides of society, and can use that experience to their advantage. In some games, that class becomes like a catch-all class, where it's if you don't want to have powers and you don't want to be the fighter, pick rogue. But we really want rogue to feel unique. We want a rogue to feel like they've had a rough past, and they've made the most of it, and they're looking to use those things to the benefit of the party. And then Bionics, I'm being really careful to try to be as vague as possible about Bionics specifically, because I don't want to color how you imagine them. Like I said, we really don't want to commission artwork.
Sure.
Which makes a Kickstarter campaign really hard, by the way. we don't want to say what they look like too much, because you might imagine something really cool, and I'll say something, and you're like, oh, never mind, that's lame. But Bionics are in some way partly mechanical, at least to the extent that they can perform powerful techniques. So they can make a wall of fire, or can enhance their abilities in other ways. And that was inspired partly by, off the top of my head, I don't remember what they're called in Phantasy Star, but you always had characters in Phantasy Star that were partly mechanical. Like one of their arms would be robotic, or you wouldn't quite know, kind of that anime concept where you wouldn't quite know if this was a humanoid. They look like a human, but they're not, or if they're actually organic.
Or they look like they'd had metal skin, or stuff like that. Yeah.
So we're kind of getting into that territory. Not that all Bionics look the same, but in that territory of they're not quite fully organic.
Yeah. I loved the Phantasy Star game. So when you said that, I was immediately like, oh yeah.
I should have started with that, huh?
well, what's funny? I dug it anyways. I'm always a big fan of anything that's genre breaking overall. But I like that there's that, that inspiration, I think, leads to something more cohesive, than just I put superheroes in cowboy land. It's
right.
Okay.
Traditional archetypes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. That's really cool. And by the way, I played, I don't know how many of those games back in the day, and I played a lot of that, and I didn't look at this and go, oh, this is Phantasy Star. So
okay, good. Well, I'll have you as a witness when the lawyers come calling. No, I'm just joking. It's inspired in a loving way. We're not trying to rip off any IP or anything, but I think if you're a fan of Phantasy Star, I think you'll see some of those similarities and enjoy it, especially with the soundtrack too. We picked, instead of having a system where you can pick whatever music you want, which would sound like a good thing, that's just one more thing that I as a GM would just spend hours. I want to find the perfect song, and I want to focus that creativity on the playing part. So the music is almost like more of a themed soundtrack. And so kind of like when you put in the Phantasy Star cartridge in your Sega Mega Drive or Sega Saturn, and the soundtrack was the soundtrack, right? If you booted the game and it said pick your music, if you were like me, you'd spend half the game picking music out and you'd never play. And I kind of just stripping those options away and saying, hey, the music is this cool retro 16-bit soundtrack reminiscent of that kind of era of JRPGs, and just roll with it and see how you feel about it. And we're definitely open to adding more music packs in the future. And just, I know we're really short on time, but I wanted to say that one of our early stretch goals is actually going to be creating another setting for 3E RPG. So Definitely, if you're not really into fantasy or you don't like science fantasy, we're going to be putting the genre up to vote with our backers. So if you become a backer, you'll actually have a say in what that next setting is going to be, and that's going to be fully supported by the system, not setting agnostic or system agnostic. It'll be a fully themed, different music, different items, different classes based on the setting.
Yeah, I saw that. That's it's a really good one because it'll be interesting to see. It's one of those things where sometimes you look at something and you're like, wait, is this kind of a generic system? Like,
right.
It kind of is, but it's definitely built in a specific direction. You having that open as a possibility is like, oh yeah, this can do some other things. So, is that something that once it's out in the world and presumably everybody's using it, you would encourage kind of people to kind of like maybe even build their own thing onto it? And
yeah, potentially. There's definitely potential for that. We put a lot of thought into making a system that works well with the science fantasy setting, but not one that's inextricably linked to it. Like even techniques being called techniques, we put a lot of thought into, could these be techniques that, you're a detective and you have certain techniques that make you especially good at sleuthing or whatever. And those could be techniques and use the same system without even being, magical in any way. So there's definitely the framework there to have other settings from the community or from our design.
That's fantastic. This is your first Kickstarter, right?
Yep, first one.
This is a very, I'm just going to say this is a very impressive piece of work for your first Kickstarter.
Oh, thank you.
Especially granted, like you mentioned the thing where you're like, oh, we don't have art, and I didn't even consider that because of some of the design elements of the Kickstarter and everything in it, but it feels like a piece of software from the Kickstarter, but it definitely indicates like, yeah, no, this is a game, this is a role playing game that you play with your friends,
right,
on software, which is great.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have a lot of experience in software engineering. I have a lot of experience with role playing. I have no experience with running a Kickstarter campaign. So like your feedback means a lot. And, I've been a backer for many projects, but I'm glad to see that the community is enjoying this, and they're able to get hopefully enough information at this point to know that it's exciting and that maybe they want to play it with their group. So definitely looking for more backers.
Yeah, well, and of course I'm gonna let all my listeners know, like, you should go check it out. I mean, it's just the idea that something like this, I keep on saying could exist, but you're there.
We're playing it tonight, actually. We have a session tonight, so it's just a closed beta right now. We're keeping it to ourselves.
That's awesome.
Cool.
But so it's there in the world. It's just get it for yourself, everybody. Like this is a cool, fun thing that I really want to try it out. I'm really excited to try this out. I'm debating getting in on the play test, even though I look at my schedule and I'm like, but
you can make time.
I can make time. You can make time.
I want to let your listeners know as well that there's still early bird backer levels available at a discounted rate. So.
Oh yeah, go check that out, everybody out there. Christian, this has been a blast. I've really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah, me too. Thank you.
And you're welcome to come back anytime you want to. I always I've been called out for saying that to every guest, and I'm like, well, I haven't had a bad guest. Like it's I've really enjoyed you. I'll say this. You asked me what some of my favorite episodes are. And the ones that stood out in my head, I kind of said like, oh, this one. But I started looking back through the library. I'm like, oh my God, this was so fun. Oh, this was so fun. And I said, oh, it's like picking it's my favorite of my children. Like I can't really do it.
Yeah, I totally get that.
But it's been really great having you on. I look forward to seeing like this. This feels like one of those things that, you talk about at one point, and then 5 years later, everybody's talking about it. And so, like, that's kind of that vibe I get from this. And I'm not always right about that stuff, but I have a pretty good record. So,
yeah, we definitely feel like we're onto something really, really special here. So we're glad to be able to share it with the community.
I think it's great. I think it's great. I've said with people on this podcast series that, at some point somebody's going to figure out how to unlock that level of integrating technology in games. And I mean, I didn't mention this, but I think you did. You can play it on desktop, but you can play it on mobile devices too.
Right. Yeah.
Can you do the GM part from mobile devices?
Actually, as a design decision at this point, the GM part is only going to be desktop.
For desktop.
But as players, the character sheet, there's no features you can't access as a player from mobile. It all looks really good. And actually, in my opinion, looks better on mobile. Actually really enjoy it.
Yeah, the design, it's got a nice little design on the mobile, on the Kickstarter. So yeah, everybody check it out. Do you have a website?
Yes, so it's 3erpg.com.
Okay.
But the main way to contact me is on Twitter, 3erpg, and then we have the Kickstarter as well. I need to update the website to redirect people back to the Kickstarter because that's where all the fun stuff's happening right now. But
well, we'll put all the links out there for everybody. That Kickstarter will be first though.
Okay, so there we go.
Everybody will see that first. Christian, it's been a blast having you on. It's always cool. I love having somebody on talking tech because I don't always get to. So, and it is a thing I kind of know about. I do okay. So this is going on. You've got 28 days left. You've already hit your goal. It's going to happen. So at this point, everybody, let's get some of those extra feats. Let's get another setting. Let's go for that.
Yeah, the stretch goals are really the best part. So I can't wait to start getting into all that stuff.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, yeah, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Absolutely. And to all my lounge lizards out there, stay classy.
To quote D.B. Besh's Carol Marcus, can I cook or can't I? How great was it to hear about something that new and groundbreaking in this industry that we all love? That's what we're here for. We're here to see something new. Christian has already beaten his goal. Help make it bigger. Let's do some more of this, everybody. We can definitely do it. We got links in the show notes. Check it out on Kickstarter, 3ERPG. He's 3ERPG on Twitter. Go for it. Here's my lovely wife.
The Lounge is a Misdirected Mark production, the media arm of Encoded Designs, with lots of great shows like this one. Misdirected Mark. Go live every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern to break down and get inside games, game mastering, playing games, and game design in an effort to entertain and inform you. The Lounge theme, And So It Begins, by Artificial Music, is used under Creative Commons 3.0. Support Contessa at contessa.rocks. Find your host, Jesse, Doc Edmond, at Doc Palindrome on Twitter. All the links from this episode can be found in the episode description.